What if your father left behind more than just memories? What if he left behind a warning? Not a speech, not a will, but a plea, scribbled in ink, buried inside the pages of a private diary he never meant the world to see. A message filled with fear, suspicion, and an unshakable truth he was too afraid to say out loud. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. And what if that warning was about his own son? "I don't feel safe anymore," the words read. "I sleep with the door locked. I'm scared of Nick." Those are the chilling lines allegedly found in Rob Reiner's diary, discovered by his children Jake and Tracy after the brutal murder of both Rob and his wife Michelle at their $13.5 million Brentwood estate. Rob Reiner, the man who gave us The Princess Bride, Stand By Me, When Harry Met Sally, a giant of cinema, a father, a husband, dead, stabbed to death in his own home, alongside the woman he loved for over 4 decades. And now, the world is learning this might not have been a random act of violence. This might have been something he feared was coming all along. And worse, something he stayed silent about, believing that speaking up would destroy his family. But silence, as we now know, didn't save him. Let's be clear, this isn't your typical true crime Hollywood tragedy. This is a layered, slow-burning psychological disaster. A script no screenwriter would dare pitch because no one would believe it. The director who shaped stories of hope and redemption, leaving behind one final story soaked in dread. One that he lived, and one that, according to insiders, he documented page by page, chronicling his fears, his doubts, and ultimately, his chilling decision to do nothing. But why? Why didn't he warn someone? Why didn't he leave, confront, call the police, go public, anything? Because Rob Reiner knew one thing. If he called out what he feared about his son Nick, the Reiner family's fragile world would come crashing down. And so he stayed. He waited. He hoped it would pass. It didn't. Here's what we know so far, and why this story has shaken Hollywood to its core. On a quiet Sunday evening, authorities were called to the Reiner residence. The call was made by Romy Reiner, 27, Rob's youngest daughter. She had allegedly come by for dinner. Instead, she found her parents' lifeless bodies in the den. Both had been stabbed multiple times. The scene was described as intimate, violent, and personal. And Romy's first words to police? "Check the guest house. My brother lives there." That brother is Nick Reiner, 32, a once promising writer, known in entertainment circles as Rob's shadow, a man who has battled addiction, mental health challenges, and legal trouble. That night, police found Nick in the guest house. Bloodied clothes, scratches on his arms. He didn't resist arrest. In fact, he reportedly whispered, "It's done," as he was taken away. 2 counts of first-degree murder. No bail. But the story doesn't stop there. Because what Jake Reiner and Tracy Reiner found the next morning, while going through their father's study, reframed everything. It wasn't a will. It wasn't a confession. It wasn't even a note. It was a diary. Handwritten. Dated. Meticulous. And inside, entry after entry documenting Rob's growing fear of his own son. He wrote of doors being locked, keys being hidden, rooms being rearranged to create space between him and Nick. And again, one sentence came back. "I am afraid of my own son." Now pause for a second. Imagine reading that. Imagine being Jake or Tracy. Your father, one of the most respected men in film history, was terrified of your brother. And you didn't know. Or maybe you did suspect something. Maybe there were whispers at family dinners, awkward silences, furtive glances, but never this. Never this. This wasn't parental worry. This was paranoia born of real threat. A fear so overwhelming, Rob had started sleeping in separate spaces. According to one entry, he even began carrying a panic button in his robe. And yet, he told no one. Not his wife. Not his children. Not the police. Because in Rob's own words, written in the margin of one haunting page, "If I speak out, I break the family. But if I stay silent, I may lose my life." He wrote it 2 weeks before his death. So here's the question that haunts everyone now. Was this double murder the tragic climax of a family struggle long in the making? Or was it something darker, a psychological implosion that could have been prevented if only someone had listened or spoken up? We'll walk through that entire journey in this expose. We'll dive into Nick Reiner's troubled past, the family's painful silences, and the shocking security footage that may confirm Rob's worst fears. We'll examine the moments where help could have arrived, but didn't. The screams behind closed doors. The red flags ignored. And, most chilling of all, we'll read the very last words Rob ever wrote in that diary. But this story isn't just about Hollywood. It's not even just about a famous family. It's about something deeper. Something that might hit closer to home than most of us would like to admit. What do you do when the person you love most starts to scare you? Do you speak up and risk tearing your family apart? Or do you stay quiet, smile for the cameras, and hope you're wrong? Rob Reiner chose silence. And that silence may have cost him everything. But what Jake and Tracy would uncover next, after reading those first few pages, would shake them to their core. Because buried near the back of the diary was an entry with a date, a name, and a phrase that made Jake drop the book on the floor. The night I hid the knife. What did that mean? Who was he hiding it from? And what really happened in the weeks leading up to that deadly night in Brentwood? What Jake and Tracy discovered next would tear open the truth about their family. And no one was ready for what it revealed. We left off with one haunting phrase, the night I hid the knife. Written in their father's own handwriting. For Jake and Tracy Reiner, that line didn't just feel like a memory. It felt like a premonition. Or worse, a desperate attempt to delay the inevitable. And here's what makes it even more disturbing. The diary wasn't written sporadically, like a man journaling in moments of stress. It was structured, intentional. Some entries were even titled, like chapters in a script. One section read, Entry 41, Trapped in my own home. Another, Entry 57, I dreamt he was standing over me. And finally, Entry 73, if you're reading this, something has happened. You could almost feel the breath leave the room as Jake read that one out loud. It was as if Rob had known these pages might one day be found by his own children in the wake of tragedy. But here's the part that cracks the heart wide open. In between the entries about fear and isolation were memories, loving ones, pages where Rob reflected on Nick as a child, birthday parties, beach trips. That time Nick wrote his first screenplay and Rob beamed with pride. He was my boy, one entry reads. I saw the world in him, until the world changed him. There it is. That unbearable contradiction that so many families face. The person you love most, becoming the person you fear most. How does that happen? How does a father go from cradling his son at night to barricading himself in the guest bedroom, clutching a security alarm in silence? The diary doesn't give all the answers, but it gives enough. Enough to understand that this wasn't sudden. It wasn't a snap. It was a slow, crushing collapse of trust, fueled by years of emotional instability, secrecy, and denial. Let's talk about that. Because denial plays a starring role in this story. Not just Rob's denial. The whole family's. Friends of the Reiners, some of whom spoke anonymously to journalists, claimed that the tension had been there for years. Whispers about outbursts. Broken items. A retreating Michelle. One housekeeper reportedly left without notice 3 years ago, telling a neighbor, "There's something wrong in that house." Something very wrong with the boy. She didn't say Nick's name. She didn't have to. So why didn't anyone do anything? That's the uncomfortable question, maybe the most painful of all. And the answer? Fear, shame, image, loyalty. The four silent killers of families in crisis. Rob Reiner wasn't just a dad. He was a figure, a brand, the liberal lion, the Hollywood heavyweight, a man whose entire public persona was built on intelligence, morality, and family values. How do you go to the press, or even to your own therapist, and say, I think my son might kill me? You don't. You carry it. You internalize it. You write it in a private diary and hope it never needs to be read. But that night, when Romy walked into the house, expecting a family dinner and instead finding a scene of horror, everything Rob had feared, everything he had predicted, came crashing into reality. And it was Romy, not Jake, not Tracy, who broke the silence first. Check the guest house, she told police. My brother lives there. And he's not well. Those words changed everything. They reframed the crime not as a random act, but a reckoning. A reckoning that had been building for years behind the smiles, the awards, the red carpet appearances. Let's take a step back. Because what makes this story so gripping isn't just that it happened. It's how long it was allowed to simmer before it did. Think about your own family. How many secrets are sitting in silence, never spoken out loud. How many red flags do we wave away as mood swings, growing pains, or just stress? How often do we protect the image of family at the expense of the people inside it? Rob Reiner wasn't naive. He was a brilliant storyteller, a man who knew how stories end. And yet, even he couldn't rewrite this one, because sometimes the story you're in refuses to be saved. And now, that story is spilling out, page by page, revelation by revelation. In the chapters ahead, we're going to explore who Nick Reiner really is and the dark path he's walked. The moments that could have changed everything, but didn't. The terrifying entries that detail Rob's descent into paranoia. What the security cameras did and didn't catch. And the legal, emotional, and moral storm now tearing this family apart. We'll follow Jake and Tracy as they dig deeper, not just into the diary, but into their own memories, questioning what they missed and what they ignored. We'll revisit Michelle's final days and whether she knew the danger she was in. And we'll hear from the one sibling who spoke up, the one whose voice was drowned out until it was too late. But before all of that, before the court trials and media circus, we start where it all truly began. Not with the murders, not with the arrest, not even with the diary, but with a quiet Sunday night, when something happened inside the Reiner estate that would change the family and Hollywood forever. Because what happened next, no one saw coming. It started like any other evening. The lights inside the Reiner estate flickered on just before dusk, casting soft golden hues across the white marble floors. The Brentwood air was still, cool, and quiet. To passing neighbors, it looked like a peaceful Sunday at one of the most private celebrity homes in Los Angeles. But inside, something was off. According to security records later obtained by investigators, Rob and Michelle Reiner's usual nightly routine was disrupted. Normally, Michelle would cook. Nothing fancy, usually pasta or grilled fish. Rob would open a bottle of wine, maybe cue up an old film, sometimes one of his own. Jake or Tracy might stop by. Romy, the youngest, would often call. But not tonight. Tonight, only Romy showed up. And what she walked into was a nightmare. It was 8:17 p.m. when she pulled into the long, winding driveway, lined with trimmed hedges and towering palms. The gate opened slowly, as always. The house lights were on, but no one answered the doorbell. She waited. Rang again. Still nothing. Then, a soft glow caught her eye. The hallway light inside flickered, just for a moment, then dimmed out. That's when she knew something was wrong. Romy used her own key. She'd been coming here since she was a child. This was supposed to be her safe place. But that night, the air felt colder, heavier. She stepped inside and called out, "Mom? Dad?" No answer. She turned left toward the main den, the room with the large bay window overlooking the pool, the room with the plush white sofa, the grand piano in the corner, and the old bookshelf where Rob kept his favorite scripts and notebooks. That's where she saw them. At first, she thought they were asleep, both lying still, too still. Her mother's arm was draped limply over the side of the couch. Rob's glasses lay shattered on the floor. The rug beneath them was soaked. Blood. Too much of it. Romy screamed. The kind of scream that doesn't just come from shock, but from something deeper, a primal, unthinkable kind of grief. She backed into the wall, fumbling for her phone. Called 911. "They're dead. My parents are dead." The dispatcher's voice was calm, trained. "Ma'am, I need you to stay with me. Are you safe?" That question made her freeze. Was she? The police arrived within 7 minutes. Patrol cars. Sirens. Flashing lights. A moment that shattered the perfect silence of one of LA's most exclusive neighborhoods. Officers moved quickly through the house. 2 bodies. Multiple stab wounds. No forced entry. No signs of a break-in. Jewelry untouched. Nothing stolen. That's when Romy said it. The line that changed the entire direction of the investigation. "My brother. He lives in the guest house. You need to check it." According to the responding officer's report, she was trembling as she said it, her voice low, as if she was afraid he could hear her. The guest house was a separate structure, across the garden path, behind a curtain of bamboo trees. Built originally as a pool house, Rob had renovated it for Nick years earlier when he moved back home after a rough stint in rehab. It was supposed to be a place of healing. But that night, it became the epicenter of suspicion. Officers approached the guest house cautiously, guns drawn. No response to knocks. Then a voice from inside, muffled, hoarse. "It's open." They entered slowly, clearing the space room by room. And there he was, Nick Reiner, sitting on the edge of the bed, shirtless, sweat-soaked. His hands were cut, not severely, but visibly. Blood on his jeans. A blank stare. They asked if he knew what had happened. He reportedly answered with one chilling phrase. "It's done." That was enough. Nick was arrested on the spot, read his rights, and taken into custody. Inside his room, they found a bloodied shirt, a pair of latex gloves, and a note, scribbled on a napkin from the kitchen drawer. It read, "Didn't want it this way." From the outside, it looked open and shut. But to those close to the family, this wasn't sudden. This was the volcano finally erupting. The one they'd all felt trembling beneath their feet for years. The outbursts, the fights, the long silences between siblings, the canceled family gatherings, the looks exchanged at dinners that said, "Don't say anything in front of him." Still, nothing could have prepared them for this. Especially not Jake and Tracy. When they arrived at the house an hour later, they were blocked at the gate by police. They weren't told details, just that their parents were gone, and that Nick was in handcuffs. Imagine that moment. You're rushing to your childhood home after a frantic call from your sister. You expect maybe an accident, a fall, something manageable. Instead, you see your parents' home surrounded by police cars, detectives, news vans already staking positions, and your brother, the boy you grew up with, being led away in cuffs. Jake's reaction, according to a neighbor, was total disbelief. He kept saying he was born into legacy. Not just any legacy, but a dynasty of Hollywood royalty. Rob Reiner, Carl Reiner, Michelle Singer. Between them, decades of influence, millions of dollars, and stories that shaped American culture. So when Nick Reiner was born in 1993, the world, at least their corner of it, expected brilliance. But instead, they got chaos. Because behind the camera flashes and red carpet smiles, something was already unraveling. Nick was different. Even as a boy, he was known to be intense, sharp, restless, emotionally volatile. Teachers noted that he struggled with boundaries. He was imaginative, yes, but something always felt a little off. In his early teens, that something took a name: substance abuse. By the time Nick was 15, he'd been in and out of at least 2 rehabilitation centers. The Reiners, to their credit, never tried to deny it. In fact, Rob spoke openly about his son's struggles in rare interviews. He once said, "Nick went through hell. Addiction nearly took him. And as a parent, there's nothing worse than watching your child self-destruct." What he didn't say was that addiction wasn't the only demon Nick was wrestling with. There were deeper ones. The kind you can't detox from. Let's rewind. Nick grew up surrounded by power. At 7 years old, he was visiting the set of A Few Good Men. At 10, he was sitting in on writers' rooms. By 12, he had his own MacBook and was scribbling down movie ideas that were actually pretty good for a kid his age. People assumed he'd follow in Rob's footsteps. But talent without discipline is a ticking time bomb. At 13, Nick was expelled from a prestigious LA prep school for threatening another student. Allegedly, he told a classmate he would cut him open like a movie scene. He was sent to therapy. The family told friends it was just stress. But there were whispers. Notes in school files. One administrator, speaking under anonymity, described Nick as brilliant, but dark, and manipulative. At 15, he overdosed on prescription pills. That was the first real scare, but it wouldn't be the last. By 18, Nick had been through 5 rehab centers, 2 sober living homes, and 1 wilderness therapy program in Utah. It was there, in the stillness of the woods, that something clicked. He got clean. For a while. He came back to Los Angeles and started writing. At 21, he co-wrote a semi-autobiographical film titled Being Charlie, a drama about a drug-addicted teen struggling with the shadow of a powerful father. It was a thinly veiled mirror, and critics noticed. While some praised the film's raw honesty, others called it self-indulgent, unpolished, even disturbing in its lack of resolution. Rob directed it. It was meant to be a father-son healing project. It wasn't. Behind the scenes, filming was allegedly a nightmare. Crew members reported tension, shouting matches, and long silences between father and son. One insider said Rob looked haunted on set. like a man directing a story he wasn't ready to live. The film flopped. But Nick kept writing. He tried stand-up comedy. He tried poetry. He started, and abruptly ended, a podcast about mental health. Nothing stuck. He bounced from job to job, apartment to apartment. Eventually, he moved back into the Reiner estate's guest house. On paper, it was practical. A safe environment. A second chance. In reality, it was a pressure cooker. Because by then, things had changed. Rob was older. Michelle was quieter. And Nick, while technically sober, was growing more erratic. Neighbors reported yelling late at night. One delivery driver filed a complaint after being chased off the property by someone barefoot and screaming. No charges were filed. But the police were called. Twice. Still, the Reiners closed ranks. They didn't speak to the press. They didn't even tell extended family what was going on. They handled it like most powerful families do. Privately. And dangerously. Here's where it gets murkier. Sources close to the family alleged that Nick had stopped taking his prescribed medications. That he was self-medicating again, not with narcotics this time, but through isolation, rage, and delusions of grandeur. He'd talk about the film he was working on. A horror script. A revenge story. One person who saw a few pages said it was terrifying, filled with imagery of betrayal, knives, and a father who gets what's coming to him. When confronted, Nick reportedly laughed it off. It's fiction, he said, but those close to him weren't convinced. Jake and Tracy had long kept their distance. Jake, a journalist turned actor, rarely visited the house anymore. Tracy, busy with her own acting career and children, spoke to her parents weekly but stayed away from the estate. Romy, the youngest, was the only one still in regular contact. She was close to Michelle, protective, especially after Michelle confided that she sometimes felt unsafe. Not threatened, just uneasy. She said Nick would appear in rooms suddenly, watch her from the hallway, whisper to himself, laugh at nothing. She told Jake once, over coffee, it's like he's rehearsing something. Like he's living in a movie in his head, and we're just extras. Jake brushed it off. So did Tracy. But Romy didn't. And the night of the murders, she remembered everything. Now let's ask the question. How does a family like this, a family with wealth, access to the best doctors, therapists, and institutions, end up here? The truth is painful, because none of those things protect you from denial, from love blinding judgment, from fear of shame, from wanting to believe your child will get better, even when all signs point to disaster. Nick wasn't a monster, but he was broken, and according to Rob's diary, he wasn't getting better. He was changing, becoming someone Rob didn't recognize, someone who, in Rob's own words, could hurt us and not feel anything. And yet, Rob couldn't bring himself to cast Nick out. He tried boundaries, cameras, panic buttons, separate sleeping arrangements. But deep down, he still hoped, until he didn't. Until the night came when all that hope died, in blood and silence. But what did Rob really say in those final diary entries? What chilling dreams did he record? What did Michelle know? And why, despite all this, did no one stop it? Because what's written on the next page of that diary turns fear into absolute dread. The house was quiet. Too quiet. Police had left hours earlier, crime scene tape still fluttering at the edge of the property. Brentwood's luxury estate was now a mausoleum. And inside, Jake and Tracy Reiner stepped through the same doors their father had opened for decades. Only this time, they were entering as orphans. They weren't ready. Not for the smell of dried blood. Not for the silence where their parents' laughter used to echo. And definitely not for what they were about to find. Jake wandered into the kitchen, fingers trailing along the counter his mother had always kept spotless. Tracy sat on the living room couch, staring at the blood-stained rug, her hands trembling. I need air, she finally whispered, standing up. But Jake wasn't ready to leave. There was something pulling at him, a sense of unfinished business. Not with Nick, not yet, but with their father. He kept his notebooks in the study, Jake said. Tracy hesitated. Why? Jake didn't answer. He didn't know yet. He just felt it. The study was Rob's sacred space. Dark wood panels, film posters lining the walls. Stand By Me, The Princess Bride, A Few Good Men. Scripts on the shelves, old family photos, books dog-eared and underlined in red ink. And at the center, his desk, a solid oak slab with drawers that had remained locked for years. Jake didn't bother searching for a key. He simply pulled. And, surprisingly, the bottom drawer opened. Inside, a leather-bound book. Black. Worn. Edges curled from years of handling. No title. No label. Just a single gold ink inscription on the first page. For me, in case I forget. For you, in case I don't survive. Jake froze. Tracy, he called out. You need to see this. They opened the diary together. What they expected to find was grief. Maybe old memories. Regrets. Perhaps even a list of things Rob wanted to say in the event of his death. What they found was terror. Real, documented, meticulous terror. Because this wasn't just a diary. It was a record of fear. Entry 1. I can't say this out loud. Every day I tell myself I'm overreacting. That it's just a phase. That I'm projecting old fears onto a child who's trying to heal. But today he stood at the end of the hallway just watching us. And something in his eyes, it wasn't Nick. Jake read the entry out loud. Tracy covered her mouth. I thought he was getting better, she whispered. Jake didn't respond. Because entry 2 was worse. And entry 3? It started with a date. The night Nick punched a hole through the kitchen wall. He apologized. Said he didn't know what came over him. But Michelle flinched. Not at the punch. At his smile afterward. I asked him if he wanted to talk. He said, There's nothing to talk about, Dad. This house is full of lies. Entry after entry painted the same picture. Rob slowly realizing that the boy he loved might be harboring something darker. Something dangerous. But what made it even more chilling was how normal Rob tried to sound. He wrote like a man rationalizing his fear. Like he was convincing himself that if he just wrote it down, it wouldn't be real. Tracy turned the pages quickly, her fingers shaking, until they hit a page titled, The Night I Hid the Knife. She stopped. Her heart dropped. Jake took over. Nick was in one of his moods again, walking around barefoot, mumbling under his breath. I noticed the drawer in the kitchen, the one where we keep the carving set, was open. One of the knives was missing. I waited until he went into the guest house, then walked the perimeter. I found it near the pool, lying on a deck chair. I wrapped it in a towel, stuck it in the safe in the garage. Just in case. I didn't tell Michelle. Jake looked at Tracy. He knew. Tracy wiped her face. And he didn't leave. Jake shook his head. He thought staying was safer. For Mom. That's the part that shattered them both. Rob Reiner, Oscar-nominated, respected, brilliant, was afraid in his own home. And yet, he chose silence. Why? Why didn't he send Nick away? Confront him? Go public? That answer came a few pages later. Entry 41. If I say it, it becomes true. I can't betray him. He's still my son. If I tell anyone what I think he might be capable of, I destroy the family. The press will find out. Tracy will shut down. Jake will blame himself. Romy will never recover. So I stay. I monitor. I wait. And I pray I'm wrong. And then came the most damning entry of all. Entry 73. If you're reading this, something has happened. Tracy's fingers hovered over the ink. She couldn't read it out loud. So Jake did. I hope this never reaches you. I hope it's just paranoia. But if something happens, if Michelle and I don't make it, please know this wasn't random. It wasn't a stranger. It came from within. And I'm sorry. I'm so sorry I didn't act sooner. I thought silence was love. I was wrong. The last line, please forgive him if you can. They sat in silence for nearly an hour. Not speaking. Not crying. Just holding the book. Everything they thought they knew about their family had changed. This wasn't just a murder. This was a ticking time bomb that had been counting down for years. And Rob, despite seeing every second, chose to stay silent. Tracy broke the silence. There's more. Jake looked confused. What do you mean? She stood up, walked to the bookshelf, and pulled out a smaller black journal. Michelle kept one too. Jake took it from her. Opened it. The first line read, I pretend I don't see it. But I do. I see everything. The truth, it seemed, was buried not in one diary, but two. And what was written in Michelle's version of events would only deepen the horror. Because if Rob feared Nick, Michelle may have known him. But that revelation, those pages, wouldn't come to light until a key moment during the investigation. And what the family discovered in Michelle's entries would force them to ask the most painful question of all. Was this really a murder, or a family's silent agreement that finally shattered? What happens when the man who once commanded Hollywood's biggest stages becomes a prisoner in his own home? That's the question that haunted Jake and Tracy as they turned deeper into their father's diary. Because the entries didn't just reflect worry, or sadness, or guilt. They charted a slow, painful descent into fear. And not fear of a stranger. Not fear of a stalker or a break-in, but fear of someone who lived just feet away. His own son. In the beginning, Rob tried to reason it away. Nick's been through a lot. He's clean now. Maybe I'm just overanalyzing. But the diary shows a clear progression, fear building like a storm. Subtle at first, then heavier, then inescapable. Entry 12. The guest house light was on again. I woke up at 2:13 a.m. The light in the guest house was on. I watched from the window for 20 minutes. Nick never moved. He just sat there, staring at nothing. I don't think he sleeps. Michelle says he's writing. I think he's rehearsing. Rob began taking small precautions. First, he added locks to the study doors. Nothing fancy, just digital codes. Then he started locking the bedroom door at night. He blamed it on old man paranoia. But deep down, he wasn't sleeping. He was listening, waiting. Entry after entry details a growing paranoia that something was coming. He started hearing footsteps at night, whispers in the hallway, doors opening and closing when no one should be awake. At first, he thought it was the house settling. But one night, he found something that changed everything. Entry 21. The bedroom window was unlatched. We never opened that window. It's old, heavy, takes force. And yet, this morning, it was cracked open. Michelle swears she didn't touch it. I asked Nick if he'd been near the bedroom. He said no, but he said it too fast. It's nothing. I'm sure it's nothing. But I'm getting cameras installed next week. That was the first mention of the security system. But here's where it gets darker. According to the service report from the security company, Rob didn't just want cameras. He wanted them hidden. He specifically asked that no one, not even Nick, know where they were installed. He placed one in the hallway, one in the study, one near the main kitchen entrance, and one overlooking the guest house pathway. But strangely, he left out the master bedroom. He later explained why in Entry 27. Michelle doesn't want to live in a prison. She says cameras in the bedroom are a line we won't cross. I respect that, but I keep a bell on the doorknob now, just in case. Yes, a bell. A small, jingly thing you'd find at a gift shop. Something you'd expect on a cat's collar, not a Hollywood icon's doorknob. But it gave him peace, at least for a while. Then came the first real scare. Entry 35. The knife was back. 3 weeks ago, I took the carving knife and hid it in the garage safe. Tonight, I found it back in the kitchen drawer. Clean. Placed exactly where it used to be. I didn't put it there. Michelle didn't either. That leaves one option. He confronted Nick. Gently, cautiously. I asked him if he'd been in the garage. He said, "Why would I go into the garage? That's your territory." Rob tried to smile it off. Nick did too. But there was something behind Nick's smile that Rob would never forget. He described it in Entry 36. It wasn't a smile. It was a smirk. The kind a wolf gives a deer before it pounces. After that, things changed rapidly. Rob stopped eating meals in the main kitchen. He and Michelle started using a kitchenette upstairs. He stopped walking the garden path at night. He stopped answering Nick's texts. Michelle noticed. She asked why. He lied. Told her he was just tired. Told her work was stressful, that his back hurt and he needed rest. But in the margins of Entry 42, he wrote, "She knows." She doesn't say it, but she knows. That unspoken tension crept into everything. Family dinners became awkward. Romy noticed and pulled back. Jake and Tracy, already distant, assumed it was just another family phase. No one knew what Rob was living through. And Rob wasn't telling. Because his fear wasn't just about Nick. It was about exposure. He wrote it clearly. "If this gets out, the Reiner name is done. Not just mine. Carl's. Everyone's. They'll turn us into a circus." So he stayed silent. Even as the fear worsened. Even as the dreams came. Yes, dreams. By Entry 48, Rob's paranoia had begun bleeding into his sleep. He described them in disturbing detail. One recurring dream featured him standing on set, directing a film. Nick was in the background. Watching. Always watching. Then the scene would shift. Suddenly he'd be home. Alone. The door creaks. Footsteps echo. A figure approaches holding something sharp. He never sees the face. But he always wakes up before the scream. He wrote, "It's always the same. It ends right before I die." It's like my subconscious doesn't want to show me who it is, because deep down, I already know. At this point, Rob's mental health began to erode. Tracy would later say that when she called him during this time, he sounded distant, like he was waiting for something. Jake noticed he'd become overly protective of Michelle, insisting she cancel events, stay home, avoid late-night errands. Michelle was growing frustrated. She loved Nick. She didn't want to believe what Rob feared. But in entry 51, Rob writes, "She told me I need help, that I'm creating ghosts. Maybe she's right. Or maybe she doesn't want to believe what she sees." Because by now, even Michelle was starting to flinch when Nick entered a room. Even she had begun locking her car at night. Even when it was in their gated driveway. Even she had stopped leaving her jewelry on the dresser. Little things. But they added up. And then, something happened that Rob never fully explained. Entry 58. "I can't protect her forever. She won't go? I begged her to take a trip. Visit Tracy. Go anywhere. She looked at me like I was crazy. Said, 'If you're staying, I'm staying.' And I wanted to scream. Because she doesn't understand, if it happens, I won't be able to stop it. She says I'm being dramatic. But this isn't a movie. I don't get a second take." Rob was reaching the edge. He even considered leaving the house himself. He almost did. Entry 60. "I packed a bag tonight. I put it in the car. Drove around for 20 minutes. I almost called Jake. But I couldn't. I turned around. Came back. Slept in the study. Didn't tell Michelle." His fear had consumed him. He couldn't think clearly. He couldn't leave. He couldn't speak. So he wrote, page after page, until the writing itself turned frantic. The last few entries are nearly illegible. The pen strokes jagged. The tone panicked. And then, on the final page before the night of the murders, entry 73, it's close. "He's been quiet. Too quiet. I feel it. Something is building. I can't shake it. I hear footsteps even when I'm alone. He's planning something. I can't prove it. But I feel it. God help me if I'm right. Tonight I'll sleep with the study door locked. I've moved the panic button to the bed. I hope I'm wrong." But he wasn't. That night was the last night Rob Reiner ever wrote in his diary. Because the next night, he was dead, along with Michelle. And the fear he had tried to document had finally come to life. But if Rob's diary was a warning, Michelle's diary was a revelation. Because she hadn't just feared what might happen. She had seen it coming. And what she wrote would change everything the family thought they knew. She had always been the quiet one. In every photo, every interview, every red carpet. While Rob Reiner charmed the cameras with wit and charisma, Michelle Singer stood just behind him, graceful, warm, but reserved. A woman who knew the value of staying out of the spotlight. A woman who built her life around protecting the people she loved. But behind that quiet grace was something deeper. And as Jake and Tracy turned the pages of her private journal, found carefully tucked away behind a false panel in her wardrobe, it became terrifyingly clear. Michelle did know something was wrong. She had always known. And unlike Rob, she wasn't documenting her fear for catharsis. She was documenting it for evidence. The journal was smaller than Rob's, sleek, minimalist, with no visible label. The cover was smooth, black leather, pristine, untouched by time, almost as if she'd always intended it to be found. The first page was simple. "If anything happens, this is not paranoia. It's real." That line stopped Tracy cold. Because Michelle wasn't the type to overreact. She wasn't dramatic. She wasn't impulsive. If she was writing this, it meant the situation had already passed her personal threshold for fear. Jake sat beside her, flipping slowly through the pages. Each entry was calm, measured, almost clinical, but it was the calm of someone who had already accepted something unspeakable, that her son might one day hurt her. Entry 3, "He watches me. Nick doesn't blink. He just watches. When I walk through the hall. When I fold laundry. When I cook. Sometimes, I pretend not to notice. But I feel it. The way his gaze lingers. He doesn't speak. He studies. It feels like I'm being rehearsed." That word again, rehearsed. Rob had used it too. Both parents, independently, had sensed the same chilling behavior. Jake leaned back in his chair. "Why didn't they tell us?" he asked out loud. Tracy didn't answer. Because she already knew. They were trying to protect them. Just like they had protected Nick. Michelle's journal covered everything Rob's didn't. Moments between mother and son. Private conversations. Small encounters no one else would have seen. And what emerged was a portrait of a woman who had come to terms with something horrifying. That love couldn't fix this, and that silence might be the only way to survive. Entry 9, the bathroom door. I was brushing my teeth when I heard the doorknob click. I had locked it, but it jiggled. Just once. No knock. No voice. Just pressure, like someone testing if I was alone. I waited. 10 seconds later, I heard footsteps fade. I opened the door. The hallway was empty, but I know it was him. She didn't confront Nick. Not that night. Not the next. She told Rob. And Rob, according to Michelle, didn't know what to do. They changed the locks the next morning, but they didn't change the arrangement. Nick stayed in the guest house. The guest house with direct access to the main house, where no security cameras were placed inside his space. One of the most painful entries was dated just a week before the murders. Entry 22, the gaslight. Nick asked me today if I was still afraid of him. I laughed, said, of course not. But he leaned in close and said, good, because you used to be. I could see it in your eyes. I didn't sleep that night. That single exchange said everything. Nick knew. He knew his mother feared him, and he knew she was pretending not to. It was a game, a power play, and Michelle, by then, had stopped believing she could win, so she went along with it. But she recorded everything. What's haunting is how Michelle's journal never fully condemns her son. She never calls him evil, or sick, or monstrous. Instead, she refers to him as lost. Entry 24, a stranger in my home. He used to smile, really smile. That crooked little smirk he had when he was 5, running around the backyard in his dinosaur pajamas. I keep looking for that boy, but he's not there. Not anymore. What's left is a shell, a mask. He talks like he's reading from a script. His emotions don't match his words. It's like something got rewired. Tracy whispered. She still loved him. Jake nodded. Of course she did. That's what makes this unbearable. Because Michelle wasn't just fearing her son. She was grieving him while he was still alive. Then came the entry that chilled them both to the core. Entry 28, the knife block. Today, I noticed one of the knives was missing again. The same one Rob had weeks ago. I asked him about it. He swore he hadn't moved it. We looked everywhere. It's gone. Nick was out walking. He came in, smiled at us, said, lose something. We said no, but I think he knew. The next day, Michelle made an appointment with a therapist. She never showed up. She canceled last minute. The reason? She wrote. He saw the calendar alert on my phone. Asked if I was seeing someone. I said no. He smiled again. That same smile. So I canceled. I didn't want to provoke him. This wasn't just fear. It was hostage behavior. She wasn't living. She was surviving. Smiling when she wanted to scream. Laughing when she wanted to run. Because in Michelle's mind, any wrong move might be the one that pushed Nick over the edge. And she wasn't willing to risk it. Not with Rob so fragile. Not with Romy still visiting. And not with the cameras always rolling in her mind. Because while the home had surveillance, Michelle was the one doing real surveillance. Every glance, every phrase, every door left ajar. She noticed it all, and wrote it all down, because she believed the day might come when someone, Jake, Tracy, or the police, would need the truth. And that day came. The final entry was dated 2 nights before the murders. Entry 31. I can't pretend anymore. He stood behind me tonight, in the hallway. I didn't hear him approach. When I turned, he was just there, smiling. Too still. He said, it's almost time. I asked him, time for what? He walked away. I told Rob we need to go. He said, we can't leave him alone. If we leave, he'll spiral. I said, if we stay, we may not survive. Those were her final written words. 2 days later, she and Rob were dead. So did Michelle know? Absolutely. She didn't just know something was wrong. She knew it was coming. But like Rob, she chose silence. Not because she was weak, but because she loved too deeply. Because even when she feared her son, she still believed he could come back. That he could heal. That her love could protect everyone. But it didn't. It became the very thing that cost her life. And now, her children were left to pick up the pieces. To reconcile the memory of a mother who sacrificed everything, with the terrifying reality that she may have seen her own death coming, and never said a word. But before they could even process Michelle's final warning, the next bombshell arrived. Because police had finally reviewed the house's security footage. And what they saw? would confirm every fear Rob and Michelle had tried to bury. And what wasn't on the footage was even more terrifying. Her voice trembled on the 911 call, but her words were clear. "He lives in the guest house. My brother. You need to check it. Please." When that call was made, the story hadn't broken yet. Reporters weren't circling. Twitter wasn't ablaze. The world didn't know Rob and Michelle Reiner were gone. But Romy Reiner did. And more disturbingly, she wasn't surprised. Because she had warned people before. Quietly. Carefully. And no one had listened. Not even her own family. To the outside world, Romy Reiner was the bright one. The creative spark who stayed under the radar. Funny on social media. Politically active. Kind. Observant. But in private, she was the watcher. The one who noticed everything. The one who felt the shifts others ignored. And when it came to Nick, she felt them years before anyone admitted there was a problem. Romy was just a teenager when Nick moved back into the guest house. At first, it seemed temporary. A transition. Rehab had been rough. He needed stability. Family. Michelle made his bed. Rob gave him space. Jake and Tracy checked in from a distance. And Romy? She watched. The first thing she noticed was his eyes. They weren't tired, she once told a friend. They were empty. And his smile? It was off. Stretched. Like it was being held up by invisible wires. He rarely laughed. And when he did, it was too loud. Too sudden. Like a sound effect cued out of place. She told Michelle once, quietly, "Something's wrong with him." Michelle's response? "He's healing. Be patient." So Romy waited. But what she saw next only confirmed her instincts. It started with small things. Nick pacing outside her window at night. She'd wake up at 2 a.m. and see his silhouette by the pool. She assumed he was smoking. Or just restless. Then she saw him staring at her. Through the window. Not moving. Not blinking. Just standing there. She closed the curtain and pretended it didn't happen. But it did. Twice. She never told anyone. Not yet. Then came the night of the voicemail. Romy had been out with friends, celebrating a birthday. She came home late, past midnight. The lights were still on. She found her parents sitting in silence. Michelle's eyes were red. Rob looked pale. Nick had left a voicemail on the house line. Just one sentence. "I don't feel like part of this family anymore. But soon, that won't matter." Rob had saved it. Romy listened, replayed it, studied their faces. They looked scared, but neither would say it. Romy asked, "What are you going to do?" Rob said, "It's just a mood. He's always been dramatic." Michelle said, "He's hurting. That's all." But Romy wasn't convinced. Because hurting people cry out. Nick didn't cry. He calculated. A month later, she brought it up again. She was home for dinner. Nick didn't speak the entire night. Then suddenly, mid-meal, he asked, "If someone in this family vanished, who do you think would be blamed?" Everyone froze. Rob changed the subject. Michelle nervously laughed. But Romy stared at him. And he stared back. That night, she told her therapist everything. The pacing. The staring. The voicemail. The dinner comment. The therapist asked, "Do you feel safe?" Romy said, "Not when he's in the room." The therapist recommended a family meeting. Intervention. Possibly police involvement. Romy said no. Because if he finds out, I don't know what he'll do. It was around that time she started recording. Not publicly. Not illegally. Just little voice memos on her phone. When she felt something was off, she'd open the app and whisper a note. "Nick watching me again. 2:14 a.m. He said he's writing something. Wouldn't say what. Laughed when I asked. Told Mom to put the knives in a drawer. She told me to stop being paranoid." Romy wasn't paranoid. She was the only one being honest. But honesty, in this family, was dangerous. Because if she was right, then silence had already become complicity. 2 weeks before the murders, Romy made the boldest move yet. She called Tracy, told her everything. At first, Tracy dismissed it. "He's been doing better," she said. "You know how he is." But Romy didn't back down. She said, "If something happens, I want it on record that I told you. You don't have to believe me. But don't say I didn't warn you." That was the last time they spoke. Until the night Romy found her parents dead. And all the warnings she had tried to give became too real to ignore. So when she called 911, she didn't hesitate. She didn't say maybe or I think. She said clearly, "Check the guest house. My brother lives there. He should be a suspect." And even then, she didn't break down. Because she knew. She had known all along. And when police asked her, just hours later, "Why did you suspect him?" She didn't hesitate. She said, "Because he told me he was going to disappear, but not before making sure we remembered him." After the arrest, Romy stayed quiet. No public statement. No interviews. But online, she posted one thing. A black square. And one caption. "The truth was always locked in the study." That post went viral. Speculation exploded. Was she referring to Rob's diary? Was there something else? Had she seen something the rest of the family refused to acknowledge? The answer? Yes. In fact, according to investigators, Romy was the first family member to mention the possibility of a journal. "Check Dad's study," she told them. If he didn't say it out loud, he definitely wrote it down. And she was right. Her father had written it. Her mother had too. But Romy? She had spoken it. And still, no one listened. Now, in the aftermath, she's been painted as the whistleblower. The truth teller. The brave daughter who tried to stop a tragedy before it happened. And she was all of those things. But she was also alone. Because when you're the only one who sees the danger clearly, you're not seen as brave. You're seen as difficult, dramatic, overreacting. But in Romy's case, she wasn't overreacting. She was underserved, left to carry the weight of knowing her brother could snap, without the power to prevent it. So the question must be asked. If Romy had been taken seriously, could Rob and Michelle still be alive? It's impossible to know. But one thing is clear. The signs were there. The warnings were loud. And the voices were real. But they were ignored. Because in families like this, silence doesn't just happen by accident. It's chosen, maintained, protected, until it kills. And now, thanks to Romy's foresight, investigators had something else to work with. The security footage. What the cameras captured would confirm everything the Reiners feared. But the real twist was in what the cameras didn't show. Because somehow, someway, the footage of the murders was missing. The cameras were supposed to protect them. That was the whole point. Installed quietly, strategically, carefully hidden so they wouldn't feel like a prison, just a safety net. A last line of defense for a man who no longer trusted the walls around him. And yet, when investigators finally pulled the footage, the truth wasn't in what they saw. It was in what was missing. The request came 48 hours after the murders. Detectives returned to the Brentwood estate with a forensic tech team, intent on reconstructing the final hours of Rob and Michelle Reiner's lives. The house had already been combed for physical evidence. Blood spatter analysis completed. Timeline approximated. Now they wanted the digital story. The cameras. Rob's cameras. The ones he never told Nick about. The ones he believed would tell the truth when words failed. Jake and Tracy stood in the driveway as technicians opened the secure panel near the garage. A sleek black box sat inside. A network video recorder, password protected. Jake provided the code. His father had written it down in the diary margin. A small note next to entry 42. "If I forget, the date I first got scared." The system powered on. And immediately, something felt wrong. The first red flag was the timestamps. Footage from the previous week loaded fine. Clear. Stable. No gaps. But the night of the murders? Between 6:32 p.m. and 7:19 p.m., when Rob and Michelle were killed, 3 cameras went dark. Not all of them. Just the ones that mattered. The hallway camera. The kitchen camera. The garden path camera facing the guest house. Gone. No static. No corrupted files. Just absence. Like someone had reached in with surgical precision and removed the heart of the story. One detective muttered, "That's not a power outage." He was right. Because the camera covering the driveway? Still running. The one in the study? Still running. Even the backyard pool camera? Still running. Only the pathways connecting Nick's guest house to the main house were erased. Coincidence? Not a chance. Investigators dug deeper. They checked the system logs. Access history. Login attempts. What they found raised the hair on everyone's arms. Someone had accessed the camera system locally, inside the house, at 6:28 p.m. The user profile? Rob Reiner. Jake stared at the screen. "That's impossible," he said. "Dad wouldn't do that." Tracy shook her head. He was terrified of touching the system. He barely knew how it worked. Exactly. Rob had set it up, but he never logged in after that. He'd written it himself in the diary. "I don't like looking at the footage. It makes it feel too real." So who logged in? And how did they know the password? The answer chilled everyone in the room. Nick had helped set up the Wi-Fi extender months earlier. He'd claimed Rob asked for help. But Rob's diary tells a different story. Nick asked about the cameras today. Too many questions. I lied and said they were fake. If Rob lied, it meant Nick already suspected. And if Nick suspected, he might have tested it, learned it, watched it, because the system logs showed something else. The cameras weren't just disabled. They were disabled manually. Using the admin panel, the password was entered correctly. No forced entry. No brute force. Whoever did it knew exactly what they were doing. Now ask yourself this. How many people in that house knew the system existed? Rob, Michelle, the installer, and Nick. But Michelle had no technical knowledge. Rob avoided the system entirely. That left one person. The same person who lived 20 yards away. The same person Romy told police to check immediately. The same person Rob had been afraid of. As investigators pieced together the timeline, another disturbing detail emerged. At 6:34 p.m., 2 minutes after the cameras went dark, the driveway camera captured Nick leaving the guest house. Shirt on, hood up, hands in pockets. He walked calmly toward the main house. No rush, no hesitation. At 7:21 p.m., 4 minutes after the estimated time of death, the same camera captured Nick returning to the guest house. This time, his gait was different. Slower. He stopped halfway down the path, looked back at the house, stood there for nearly 30 seconds, then continued walking. No cameras recorded what happened in between, but the timestamps told the story the footage could not. Jake felt sick. Dad was right, he whispered. Tracy closed her eyes. This wasn't speculation anymore. This was confirmation. Rob hadn't been paranoid. He'd been observant. He had sensed something the rest of them had tried to rationalize away. And now the evidence was backing him up. But the worst discovery was still coming. Forensic analysts noticed a brief anomaly in the system's metadata. A ghost file, 36 seconds long, timestamped at 6:41 p.m. File name, temp_cache_004. It wasn't video. It was audio. The system had a built-in audio buffer meant for syncing, never intended for storage. But this one fragment had survived. Barely. They played it. At first, nothing but static. Then, footsteps. Muffled voices, a chair scraping against the floor, and then Rob's voice. Quiet, strained. Nick, please. A pause. Another voice, calm. Too calm. I told you not to lock the door. Then the audio cuts out. No screams. No chaos. Just that. That sentence. That calm, terrifying sentence. The room went silent. Even the detectives looked shaken, because that line matched something Rob had written months earlier. He doesn't yell when he's angry. He goes quiet. That's when I'm most afraid. This wasn't a heated argument. It wasn't a snap. It was controlled, planned, and executed with chilling restraint. The defense would later argue the audio was inconclusive, corrupted, unreliable. But the family knew. They didn't need a jury to tell them what they were hearing. They were listening to the moment Rob's fear came true. And Michelle? Her voice was never heard, which raised another devastating possibility. That she had already been attacked. That Rob's final act may have been trying to protect her. Then came the final nail. Investigators discovered that the cameras had been re-enabled at 7:22 p.m., 1 minute after Nick returned to the guest house. As if someone wanted the system to look normal again. As if they believed the absence would go unnoticed. But Rob Reiner had documented everything. He had known this might happen. He had prepared for it. And even in death, he had left a trail. The district attorney later described the footage as circumstantial but compelling. But for the family, it was devastating. Because the cameras didn't just show what happened. They showed how long it had been coming. How many chances there were to stop it. And how desperately Rob had tried, quietly, privately, to keep the peace. At the cost of his life. As word of the footage spread internally, something else began to ripple through Hollywood. Because this wasn't the first time Nick Reiner's name had surfaced in whispers. This wasn't the first time people had felt uneasy around him. And soon, stories began to emerge. From old sets. From producers. From people who had crossed paths with Nick years earlier. People who had noticed the same thing Rob and Michelle did. The stare. The silence. The sense that something wasn't right. And now, they were ready to talk. Because what the cameras couldn't show, Hollywood already knew. And what they were about to reveal would make this tragedy even harder to ignore. Because Rob Reiner wasn't the only one who was afraid. Hollywood has a talent for pretending it doesn't see things. Until it does. And when it looks all at once. After the surveillance revelations began circulating quietly among investigators, something else started happening. Something just as unsettling. Phones started ringing. Emails were returned after years of silence. And people who had once brushed